Welcome to the Low Demand Parenting Podcast, where we drop the pressure, find the joy, and thrive, even when it feels like life is stuck on level 12 hard. I'm Amanda Diekman, author, autistic adult, and mom of 3. I'm not here as an expert, but a fellow traveler. Together, we're learning how to live more gently, authentically, and vibrantly in this wild parenting life. Welcome, everyone. I am really honored to have a conversation today about the lived experience of the low-demand parenting path with my friend and local Durham resident, Jeff. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Can you tell us a little bit about your family's journey and what you've been through?
Sure. I'd be happy to do that. So my family consists of myself, my wife, and my daughter. My wife and I met some time ago. Of course, we had this beautiful, empathetic, creative, growing daughter that we love. But before we did that, we had very extensive academic careers. Went to a lot of school, and that'll be important for some of the PDA stuff I think that I'll discuss soon. We also have succeeded in many different career paths. So she's the CEO of a nonprofit called the End Fund. I've been working in pharmaceutical development and research labs for over 20-something years. And I think that's relevant because we introduced into this world a beautiful PDA daughter. And I think, as you and others know, those paths are not necessarily consistent with each other. We've been engaged in what the world, and I'll use these air quotes, but I call the typical manual or the conventional wisdom tells you to keep moving, keep succeeding, keep producing. We were very driven and still are, but we had this daughter who we realized was very intelligent and very much loved learning. And I think because we were raised that way, expected her to follow a similar path, and that just didn't happen. At first, that certainly makes things very challenging. I'll argue in the end that it's a gift, that it forces all of us to be our best. So we were following this path, and about 2.5 years ago, actually even for a couple of years before that, there was a series of challenges, especially with school, where we realized our daughter wasn't performing as well as she wanted to and as well as we thought that she could. And we just didn't understand it. We weren't raised this way. We did well in school. I have a Ph.D. My wife has 2 master's degrees. We just didn't understand, if I'm being perfectly honest. And I think looking back, my daughter understood the whole time what was going on, as many PDAers do. So the changes that I'll describe as we talk were really mostly in us, in me and in us. We made so many mistakes. And so that's what forced us to learn a better way. So about 2.5 years ago, our family hit a crisis. And unfortunately, I think with families that have PDAers, that is a common occurrence. I would really love to help people understand your system of low-demand parenting and maybe PDA profiles before it hits the crisis moment. But we hit it. And we struggled a lot with it, especially myself. And then go forward about a year, we realized that the things that we were trying just were not going to work. There was so much school trauma that school was basically off limits at this point. It's just something that wasn't working and wasn't going to work for our daughter. So we knew we had to find a better way, and that's what we've been doing. About that time, we were introduced to an occupational therapist. Her name is Jenna Meehan. She's also a local person here in Durham. When we first talked to Jenna, she listened to our story for about an hour, and she simply said, "Have you ever heard of PDA?" And we, of course, had not. And she said, maybe as a starter, you should go listen to these 2 podcasts. And there were 2 adults with PDA who grew up and had the experiences as a child, had the experience as an adult, and described it. And I listened to those podcasts, and that's what started us down this journey, changed my life.
Can you share a moment when you were able to identify and prioritize what truly mattered in your relationship with your daughter?
There's so many, right? We could go through example after example. I think I'd like to say something about, as I mentioned just previously, my daughter's education path. My daughter was invited to the gifted program here, which is very good and very high reputation. We, in a way, thought that maybe she had made it. I did a similar path in a different part of the country when I was young. And my wife's mother was a teacher of gifted kids. So we both just inherently thought, oh yeah, this is a good step to move forward. When we realized that wasn't going to work, we needed something different. And there was a light bulb moment for me that happened. So we're introduced to the idea of unschooling, which I know you know well. And we had no background in it and no understanding of it. And of course, we had all the fears. So many things in low demand parenting and PDA child raising are based in fear. So we didn't want to miss the opportunities that we knew we had to meet. If she doesn't learn something now, then she won't be able to learn this later. She'll miss out on life and we'll be bad parents. In working through that, we came across and reached out to some people that were much more involved and educated about the unschooling pathway. We have a consultant who said something like this to me. She's in England and was very experienced in these ways. And I'll paraphrase. She said something like, if your goal is to raise a daughter who is, and she went through a long list, she's adjusted, smart, creative, empathetic, and with a strong love of learning, and you want her to be that in her 20s, a 20-something person like that, then what does it really matter what the exact curriculum is in the 5th or 6th grade this week? I could see the light bulb going off, and I said, wow, she's totally right. So that made me realize that the only way that I could stop that from happening was to continue to do what we were doing already. And so we needed to find a different way. And I truly understood that my daughter wanted to learn and wanted to succeed. She didn't need our boundaries and goals and punishments to motivate her. That just doesn't work. And I'm going to borrow this term, pressure sensitive kids. You may have a different label. You may be autistic, you may be PDA, you may be ADHD. Go down the list. There are common threads among those kids. And one of them is they tend to be pressure sensitive. The more pressure you put on them, the more they fail, the more they resist, the more they pull back. They also tend to be quite sensitive, as we all know. When you dial in and realize it's that sensitivity that you can tap into, they really do care deeply, in fact, more deeply than I think what are typically called neurotypical kids in school. Kids like ours are learning more along the way, I think because they've given consent. And I think that's a big concept that I realized when I realized what's important for my daughter is that she have consent in everything that she does. Typical school and down the spectrum to unschooling tends to mirror, let's say, a game theory in a way. There are rules and there are goals and there's immediate feedback. And then to truly play a game, there is a voluntary participation. And all of those school systems have all of those features except for the consent. The only one that I've found that has true consent is unschooling. Unless they unschool and then choose to go back into school, then at least they've chosen to do that. So that's what I knew. I knew inherently and in listening deeply to my daughter after this school experience that the consent was primary for her. And that it's played out in everything that I think about with her, everything I experience with her. If she doesn't have consent, there's usually a problem.
Yeah, I agree. I call these kids the canaries in the coal mine. They're speaking up on behalf of all kids who don't have quite as sensitive of a consent meter, as you're saying, but who care just as much. Let's dig in here a bit. Low demand parenting is all about proactively meeting the needs of your child, and that demand drops are essentially releasing an expectation that isn't aligned, that isn't doable, or your child isn't able to give consent. And I'd love to hear you talk about some of the ways that you've been able to get proactive with meeting those needs. Where people get really stuck with low demand is just meeting the needs in the moment. Just, oh, she can't go to school today. Okay, what are we going to do with her today? And truly releasing expectations and moving into this new life. It takes a lot of forward thinking and big moves and big steps. Can you tell us about one of the ways that you've been able to drop demands and meet those needs?
Your book put language to what I was experiencing already. I know you're a person that likes to make lists. You like to define the dropping the demand in the immediate short term. It's not the best practice, but it's better than not doing it, right? There's the whole concept to then going on to fake dropping, where you really do release an expectation, but you don't process what's behind it and you start to resent it and things like that. So of course we've done all those things and we had to learn along the way. I think to truly drop it, it has to be, to borrow your phrase, gentle and genuine. And I think transparency is so important, whether you're in the middle of dropping a demand or whether you're just interacting with your pressure sensitive kid. So being proactive, I think, is the step at which you've gotten the hang of it. You've had some success. You're having a little bit more of a connection. And so you're anticipating a little bit of what might come next and what might be helpful, even though it hasn't been an exact problem between you and your child. An example for me is we have all these expectations around our house. You have to clean your room. You have to make your bed. You have to have your laundry put away. You have to sit at the table. All these things that we all know so well. One thing for us was it was a challenge, and sometimes still is, to have clean clothes. And we've worked through the demand falls on me and for us to wash clothes. But there's this whole process that, whether people realize it or not, of processing clean clothes after they've been washed. Some people fold them a certain way. Some people have to put them away in drawers. Some people have to put them away on shelves, whatever the situation is, right? Some people fold their socks together and match them when they pull them out. Some people throw them all in a drawer. But whatever your system is, it's really an expectation of yours, and it's a demand, or at least it can be. For me, I didn't have strong feelings going in how all this stuff gets processed, but it was the habit in our house that when you wash your clothes, you fold them, they get put away, even in our daughter's room. That was becoming more and more of a problem over the years because we couldn't find things. They didn't get put in the right place. When you go to get the shirt on the bottom of the pile, the rest of the pile comes out. It wasn't a reasonable expectation. And when I really sat back and thought about it, I thought, what does it really matter? The important thing is that they're clean clothes and their kid is comfortable wearing them, right? I went out and I proposed proactively that we have 2 different hampers, one for dirty clothes, one for clean clothes. And we bring the clothes out of the dryer, we'll put them all in the big hamper and leave them there. That's fine with me. And if you need to find your clean clothes, you can find them there. And then it was actually a little bit of an issue. This is an ongoing issue for us because it's hard to get to the bottom of the pile. You're trying to find a particular sock or shirt or something. So I said, let's get a second one. And we're in the process of getting a second one so you can take the clean clothes from one and put it in the other. Now, I know a lot of adults who would have a big problem with that. They're all going to be wrinkled. You're not going to be able to tell what's from what. How you didn't lose a sock? And I said, you know what? It doesn't really matter. By doing that, we've released some anxiety, and we tend to have clean clothes available when they're needed.
I'm thinking about facing criticism. You mentioned for a lot of parents, they would have all these concerns with the clothes example that you gave, or any number of others. There's judgment, there's criticism, there's whatabouts. You mentioned before the fear that lives underground. How have you navigated those kinds of external judgments or criticisms? And I particularly want to open up just as a father, where many men in the families that I work with feel really defensive about that criticism. And it's really hard to manage. It's really hard for women and non-binary people as well. Let's just say criticism is hard for all of us, but it intersects deeply with the role you play. So how have you navigated that?
So I think there are a few ways that I would say. The first, quite honestly, connecting with people like yourself and people in the community that are living similar experiences and maybe understand a little bit better has been a key step for. I've honestly, like you, and as I read in your book, I tried to find the manual where you can find where all this is written. What am I doing wrong, and how should I be doing this? And it didn't exist. In fact, I have this metaphor that I describe to therapists and other people when they want to understand how we're approaching these things. And I say, I have this metaphorical dumpster right outside our house. And I take all of the advice from all the typical people in the world and I dump it in that dumpster. And every once in a while, I throw a match in there and I light it on fire. So it's all gone. And I think it's so reaffirming to say, you're all wrong. Yeah, I don't know how else to say it. I don't mean it as an insult. I just mean you're not living our lives. You're not walking in our shoes, and you're not living with our child. So that kind of leads me to one of my other points. So there's the community aspect, and connecting with people like yourself and talking through these things was really what changed it for us. I think that trusting your own instinct is absolutely vital. That, again, as I just said, we have a long list of adults, whether it be other adults of parents, let's say, of other kids, teachers, therapists, clinicians along the way, others too, that have been giving us advice that just wasn't helpful. And at the end of the day, those people might have a relationship with our child for a year or two, or maybe even 3, but probably not more than that. Our relationship is for our life. If you know your child best, you have to trust your own instinct and do what's best. And I think that, as you say, being a father, there's a lot of pressure to be a good parent in the world. And there's a lot of pressure, especially as a father, to be the provider, keep working, be successful in your career, be tough, set the boundaries, set the consequences. I know a lot of fathers I've talked to who said they were raised to be the dictator in a way. They were the authoritarian. There's a lot of pressure to be that way, but it doesn't work, and it's not the best way to be. Our pressure-sensitive kids remind us of that all the time. So being genuine and being humble, I think, is a better way to be a father. If I could say it this way, I think if you want to be a real man, you've got to be able to show your feelings.
You could say it that way. That's a beautiful way to say it. When we get to connection, we're really at the heart of it. What's so painful about trying all the things that don't work is that not only do they not work, but they send us and our kids further and further apart. And at the heart of what we are longing for is just to be with them and what they're facing. Can you tell us a little bit about what it's been like to reconnect with your daughter and to put connection at the center of your relationship?
It's a great question, and it's really at the heart of what we're talking about. Again, talking about whether someone is PDA like our daughter or pressure sensitive in another way, one of the key ways to make sure that you build that connection is to genuinely understand and appreciate what might be happening underneath the surface. And it's not something that the rest of the world asks of us. They usually judge behavior, and they judge surface level things that don't really address what's underneath the surface. There's no way that you can be connected to your child if you don't appreciate what's going on underneath the surface. And that's true of people. That's the thing about low demand parenting in the way you described it. It's critical for kids like ours, but it's also important and works very well for everybody. It shows respect and connection, and it's just a better way to be, I think, as you raise kids. For me, it's important, I should say, that I remember that I've not lived in my daughter's shoes. She's been raised in a world that's different than the one I was raised in. In the same way, I don't think others can look at me or her and think that they know that they've lived in our shoes or been raised in the world we've been living in. As I mentioned, it's common for people to focus on behavior, and there's a fatal flaw when you focus on behavior, because the common thing is to have some sort of reaction to that behavior. That reaction could be positive or negative. And what people may not understand is both of those can be unhelpful. If the focus is on behavior, even the approval is not helpful sometimes because it creates a demand. You're basically saying, I love you when you do this or when you behave the following way. And inherently they interpret that as, you don't love me when I don't do that. So it's very counterintuitive to the traditional parenting manual, but I think the key is that it's focused on behavior and not what's under the surface. So when I connect with my child, I'm not focused on the surface level behavior. In fact, I embrace the term I have said about reframing things. I reframe everything now. Let's say, as an example, your child is screaming at you, I hate you, I hate you, I hate you. A lot of times, they don't really mean the words that they're saying. What they're saying is, I'm struggling and I need help, right? So they're actually communicating with you in the best way they can. What kind of a parent wouldn't want that? If you're raising a daughter like I am, and your focus is on a certain behavior and your focus is on them being compliant with what you want, that's not connecting. And one way to think about that is, if you raise your child to be compliant through their entire childhood, what do you think they're going to be like when they get to be an adult? Do you want them to be an adult who is just 100% compliant? I don't think so. I don't want that. And I think it's important to remember that now, that to truly connect is a beautiful thing. Now, one of the ways I've done that is again, I don't want to give too many details and break confidences, but we have had some struggles along the way with food and choices of food. And we misinterpreted that at first. We had therapists that tried to help with it, and it just wasn't helpful. We realize now there's a strong sensitivity going on to maybe foods or smells or tastes or colors that are real. These things in the traditional parenting model, you're not taught that those things can be real. You're taught that those are superficial things and the behavior to not eating food is what you should focus on. It's just not true. Once you start to realize that these issues are real and actually your kids do want to do well and want to eat new foods and want to learn and want to do all the behaviors that people are criticizing, they want to do them well. You realize that they're experiencing trauma every day and all the time. And what kind of a parent would want that? Maybe there are people, but I don't know them that want that. So I realized that there were only a few foods that worked, consistently for my daughter. And so I'm a big, people that know me say I'm a little bit crazy about nutrition and staying healthy. And I like to work out. I like to eat healthy. I like to teach kids about eating healthy. And when you eat just a few foods, it's not consistent with that paradigm. I realized that's what was working for my daughter. So I embraced that. I also realized along the way, there were some struggles when she was around people who were eating and drinking and making sounds and smells, and it just wasn't a comfortable way to be. And again, I think in the traditional parenting upbringing, I know many adults actually who would say they just need to get over that. How are they going to survive in this world if they can't be at the table with someone else? But you know what? When you realize what's going on under the surface and you connect, you realize, why do I want to traumatize my daughter? I don't want to traumatize my daughter. So I made some decisions to embrace the few foods that work. And sometimes questions or demands. Sometimes you can put pressure on, it's time to eat, it's time to eat, it's time to eat this. You have to do that a little bit sometimes, but what I found is once we've connected that I changed my eating habits to eat foods from, say, restaurants, takeout restaurants that my daughter liked or that worked for her. So I would say, I'm planning to go to X restaurant to pick something up. Would you like me to get something for you too? I'd be happy to. And the answer a lot of times is yes, and then it works. And if I bring something home, I put it somewhere where she can eat quietly and safely, and I leave and I go eat mine elsewhere. And those are not ways that I was raised. Those are not ways that many parents I know raise their kids. It means you don't have dinner time. You don't have how was your day conversations around the dinner table, but that's what works for her, and that's how we've connected. Now, I should say, going back to the question, if I say I'm going out, I'd be happy to get something for you. If she says no, then I don't, and I don't push it, because I've realized too along the way that if you're truly connected and you ask a question of your kid and they say no, I realize if you're not willing to accept no as the answer, then it probably really wasn't a question. And that's an important parenting concept, right? If you're requiring that they do something, you're not asking them to do it. I don't think you do that when you're truly connected, unless there's an issue of safety. You might require them to get out of the way of a moving car, for example. Those are important things to do. But one of the ways that I remember and keep myself focused on what's important is I have these little phrases along the way. And one of them I learned these from some people who I don't necessarily agree with their entire approach. But this one I learned and I've held on to, and it is connection over correction. So in those moments when you want something of your child, you want to change the behavior, what's going on, if by escalating your mood and escalating your request is going to damage your connection with them, your relationship, then don't do it. And the easy way to remember that is connection over correction.
I love that. Jeff, thank you so much for bringing so much wisdom forward that you have learned in this journey with I love the way you introduced her, just your beautiful, creative daughter, that she really has brought so much into your own journey. And I'm really grateful that you have given us all this time today. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you very much.
If this podcast is speaking to your soul, you can subscribe through wherever you get your own podcasts. Even better, if you feel the nudge, head on over to Apple Podcasts in particular and leave us a review. It's such a helpful way for new people to also get to experience what this podcast wants to bring into their lives. I'm Amanda. Remember, it takes great strength to let things go. I'll see you next week.